Joining us now on the MegaCast is Dr. David Schwartz. He's the psychologist and director of OU Counseling Center there at the university. Doctor, thank you again for being with us.
Yes, thank you for having me back. I appreciate it.
It's been a while since we have a touch base with you. And I think before students were back in class to some degree, you're remote again. How are things going over there at the university?
It's for obvious reasons. I think it's been a very challenging year for particularly the students, but also the staff working at the university. And, just like we talked about several months ago when we met, it's, one day to the next, 1 week to the next, things have been changing. And, one of my philosophies I've been preaching with my staff all year is we need to be adaptable, flexible. I've been telling them we need to be like water and take it as it comes. So, yep, right now we are again fully remote and probably will be that way for a while, I'm guessing. So,
when you have to be remote, is it harder to reach some of those students or easier?
That's a good question. I mean, in some ways it can be more challenging. I think one of the things is a lot of younger students now, they don't use voicemail quite as much. So they'll either not have it set up or it's full. But certainly with email, we have other ways of reaching them. In many ways, I was joking the other day, I think me and my staff have actually been far more responsive this year because we have more technology involved. So we have all of our office phones that are still active and they all come right to our computer. So when I get a phone call, I get it on my computer. If I get a voicemail, I get an alert right away in my email. And so in many ways, we're actually able to connect with students much more quickly, but it can be challenging getting a hold of students because schedules are different. And, with basically relying mostly on email and voicemails, that can be challenging at times.
Yeah, and so many students too, if they're remote, they're not necessarily there. They're back wherever they live, and that can be not in Michigan.
Yes, yeah, and schedules are very different. Obviously there's a lot of synchronous classes, but there's some async classes too, and a lot of our students are more night owls, so they tend to have more later schedules right now. So that can be challenging as well as just working around the different adaptations we've had to make in our schedule.
So can we talk a little bit about what are some of the top issues that you're seeing with your students right now?
I would say that, the two top issues are actually the same top issues that us and other counseling centers across the country have seen for years, with the number one being anxiety and number two being depression. But obviously there's differences. I think while we are seeing quite a bit of each of those, we're also seeing, I think, a higher degree of severity in students coming with much more severe anxiety or depression. Loneliness is another big one, feeling disconnected. A lot of struggles with just the adapting to the new format of going to school, dealing with disappointment and, what expectations they had. If you're an incoming freshman, you have certain expectations of what college is going to be like, and it hasn't been like that this year. And on the flip side, if you're an outgoing senior who's graduating, that also looks very differently. So, just challenging differences in expectations and certainly quite a bit of struggles with the, switching to remote learning. There are some students that actually do really well with that, but I would guess that the vast majority struggle because one thing we've learned over the past 9 months is that everything takes longer when you're doing it remotely. You have to factor in more time to, even just getting, contacting other students or us or other professors. There's a little bit more work involved. Doing the work takes longer. And on top of everything, like we talked about several months ago, is everybody's baseline anxiety is still significantly higher. And when we are trying to operate under those very stressful conditions, we tend to we forget things more easily, or we're not as organized, and our schedule gets a little bit more blurred, and our boundaries between work and home life get blurred. And all of those things, among many more, have been some big challenges this year.
Yeah, so it's not even so much about the students, but the staff and the professors as well, because it's not so easy right now to put your life in these boxes and move from, situation to situation, because as you mentioned, they're blending into one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, first, I'm really incredibly proud of the staff across OU, because I think in just a short period of time, like within the counseling center, within really a matter of a week, we moved our clinic to a new location. Then a week later, moved it completely online. And I think there's a lot of good things that are going to come out of this, but I think there's going to be a lot more staff and professors and other professionals who are much more feeling at ease with technology and being more accessible to students in new ways. I think that'll be a positive that comes out of this. But yeah, that blurring of boundaries from home to work is difficult. You know, one of the recommendations when I do different trainings with staff is to, if you have the ability to have a separate space for your office, you know, like my office that I'm in right now, this room is only used for work. I don't use it for anything else other than work. And so I know when I leave this room and close that door, the work day is over. And setting boundaries like that, even if they seem kind of silly on the surface, they really do work. Even with dressing, I tell people dress like you would go to work normally too. And then at the end of the day, change into your comfortable clothes. You know, obviously there's some wiggle room with that because there are advantages of working from home. It's a little bit more comfortable. But all the little things we can do to kind of establish those boundaries really help protect us from having our work bleed too much into our home life.
That's great advice for everyone out there. You know, it doesn't matter if you work in a college setting, an office setting, or any setting. If you are working remotely, it's just that. Try to have that place that is your workplace, and when you leave it, you leave it.
Yes.
With that, with the students, there are some students that it's been a confusing time, I think, for them, especially during the holidays. If they're on campus, even if they're remote learning and they're still living on campus or off-campus apartments, you know, they're being told, go home, don't go home, stay home, get tested, don't get tested. It's so confusing for them. And then you're throwing in the holidays on top of that.
Yes.
What are you seeing and what are you dealing with right now?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think this time of year is a tough time of year for a lot of people, right? The holiday blues it's a real phenomenon. It's something that actually happens. And then you throw into that mix of pandemic and just a little bit ago, a very contentious election and the social justice issues that have been brought to the forefront. You know, it's been a very stressful time for students. And that can be a really big challenge, I think, to deal with all of that. And on top of that, the normal experience of that down sometimes we feel during the holidays. You know, for a lot of people, holidays are a celebratory time where people are gathering together with families, something to look forward to. But there's also a lot of people out there, it's more of a mixed bag, right? Because it's a reminder of the people that aren't with us, that maybe were with us at previous holidays. And certainly this year, more than any other year in my lifetime, there's going to be more of that. There's more losses, loss of life, loss of jobs, loss of financial security, all of the losses, all the way down to just the loss of our normal routines in everyday life. All of those big changes can exacerbate, those feelings. I read a statistic that 64% of people who identify of having some type of mental health or mental illness problem report that during the holidays, those issues become significantly worse. Now, that was pre-pandemic. So you add in pandemic to that, I can only imagine it's just going to be that much more of a negative impact on people. And it's not that there aren't things we can do, and there's certainly some hopeful things and some tips that we can give you with that. But I think, this holiday, we just have to be honest. This set of holidays is not going to be like any holiday season any of us experienced before. And I think on one level we have to accept that, but we also have to adapt and find creative ways of making it something that could still be something where we're connecting with other people and feeling that holiday spirit, so to speak.
Dr. David Schwartz with us on the Oakland County Megacast. He's a psychologist and the director for the Oakland University Counseling Center. And with that, Dr. Tu, what advice do you have to parents if their college student right now is saying, maybe I need a gap year?
Yeah, that's a tough decision because I think it's all going to depend on the context, because there's some situations where that might be the best decision. If I've known students who were going into their senior year and they were planning on taking a gap year before they go to graduate school, for example. And maybe for that student, it makes sense to do the gap year first and then go straight to graduate school. I think the downside of the gap year is that typically when we think of gap years, at least historically speaking, it's a year or two to grow as a human being, whether it be taking, traveling the world or doing an internship or volunteer work. And we're obviously much more limited in what we can do in those gap years. So I caution people to really, if they are thinking about taking a gap year, to really come up with a solid plan of what they're going to be doing that year, what they can be doing for their own self-growth and improvement, their emotional well-being, the professional growth and academic growth as a student. But it's certainly something I think a lot of families have been discussing. And I don't think there's any right or wrong answer. I think for each individual, depending on their context and their situation, they're going to have to figure out what's going to work best for them.
You're listening to 89.3 WBLD Orchard Lake, 88.1 WBFH Bloomfield Hills here on the Oakland County Megacast. Dr. David Schwartz with us over at Oakland University. Before we let you go, Doctor, any great advice for any of us, or we try to hopefully leave interviews on a positive note?
Yes.
Anything positive out of this pandemic you think for you and your team, or for the students as well?
Absolutely. I think, just a quick tips I would give is, I think like any time of high stress, make sure you're checking in with yourself, make sure that you're monitoring your moods, and practicing self-care. So that is critical, right? And that could be trying to stick with a regular routine. That's a type of self-care. That could be connecting with family and loved ones, or other people that you can talk with. It might look different this year, and we might have to be very creative in how we connect, but there's still ways to bring that togetherness together, to that feeling of togetherness of this season. I think, it'll look differently, but we have to accept that there's going to be differences. I think one of the things I've been preaching a lot, I do anytime during the year, but especially now, is practicing gratitude. And I know that gets said a lot, but I think, this is the time of the season where we tend to focus on what we're grateful for. And this year's going to be a challenge. And for some of us more than others, there's going to be some really hard, difficult ways to try and look for those things we're grateful for. One thing I preach to my clients is that practicing something I call the bookend technique. And that's where the first thing you do in the morning, I want you to write down 3 things that you're looking forward to about the day. And at the end of the night, last thing you do before you go to bed, write down 3 things that you are happy about or grateful about the day. And I don't care how awful your day is, you can always find 3 things, even if they're small things. Even if one of the things is, I'm happy the day is finally over, I made it through it. That's still something to be grateful for. And, I think we can find those things, and it's not trying to, make something, spin this in a positive way, because we know this is difficult, but there's always little positive things we can be grateful for and happy about. And then most importantly, don't be afraid to ask for help. There are, whether it be a trusted friend or loved one, or your doctor or your therapist, or if you don't have a therapist, one of the positives that's come out of this is that there's a whole industry of psychologists and social workers and counselors that have now been able to shift to work virtually. So we're far more accessible than we've ever been before. There are lots of people out there still taking new clients. Don't be afraid to reach out for help, especially if the holidays are feeling overwhelming for you. Use crisis lines if you need to. Those are available on our website. If you're a part of the OU community, don't hesitate to reach out to us as well. But most important, know what the resources are out there for you. Know that you're not alone, and know that it's okay to not be okay. We don't have to pretend like everything's normal and everything's fine. We're all feeling that way where it's not okay. And sometimes we have to say, you know what, that's okay too.
One of the good things I hope that definitely comes out of this pandemic is allowing people to be comfortable to talk about their mental health. It
Yes.
does not need to be this veil of secrecy that we hold within ourselves. It is something to be discussed, just like if you had a cancer diagnosis or some other health issue, our mental health is just as important as well.
Absolutely. And that's one of the nice things working at a college, because in my time at OU, I've noticed that the attitudes have changed, and we still got a long way to go, but students now are much less likely to kind of shy away from seeing me if they see me on campus. They'll come up and say hi, and the stigma has been reduced with the younger generations, and that's such a really pleasant thing and very positive thing to see. And I really hope that continues to move in that direction.
We all do as well. Dr. David Schwartz with us here on the Oakland County Megacast. We appreciate your time.
Yes, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.